The Spin-Off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
Estou passando nesse podcast para dividir uma informação que fez toda a diferença na minha vida. Quer fazer pós-graduação, mas tá impossível correr de um lugar para o outro?
Pois é, ainda mais com o trânsito.
Então você precisa conhecer a educação à distância do Senac. Sabia que é nota máxima no MEC? E tem diversos cursos de pós-graduação para te levar ainda mais longe. 100% online, sem necessidade de TCC e com acesso direto a todos os professores.
Ah, saber isso fez diferença sim.
Inscreva-se já na pós-graduação EAD. Quer saber? Senac EAD.
Tēnā koutou katoa, this is Gone by Lunchtime. My name is Toby Manhire. With me today, happy to introduce Ben Thomas.
Kia ora.
And Annabelle Lee Mather.
Tēnā kōrua, tēnā koutou.
Kia ora kōrua. And also a big thank you to Tina Tiller, who is on the decks with us today. Annabelle, the Hui is back underway.
The Hui is back on air on March 1 in our new time slot, streaming live 8:30pm on the interweb.
And will you
on
be...
the TikToks, the Bebo, MySpace, we're there, and then replaying straight afterwards after News Hub late on Monday evenings.
And have you yet launched an investigation into one of the great mysteries of 2021, the disappearance of one of the thought leaders, the thinkfluencers from Twitter, giant of Tūhoi, Benjamin Thomas?
I spent personally several days just wandering around Twitter calling Ben's name, falling down rabbit holes.
Falling down stairs.
Falling down Sean Plunkett threads and stuff, screaming Ben's name and got no response. So now I've got Mihi onto it. Mihi's driving around in her yellow electric vehicle, up and down the streets of Freeman's Bay and Mount Eden and all the flash places.
Just
Ben usually
shouting out
hangs
the
out.
windows saying, has anybody seen Ben Thomas
Craft
NZ?
beer bars and stuff, but no luck yet. We're going to have to roll out Mel Reid and Paula Penfold in a minute.
You abandoned Ben, Twitter, but you didn't abandon your greatest digital love, which is the podcast, Gone by Lunchtime. Can you tell us what happened? People want to know. There's a lot of upset people out there.
I deactivate my Twitter account fairly regularly, probably at least once a year or so.
Okay.
Just to allow my synapses to kind of grow back, to heal my brain from the social media space, into sort of enough of a working condition to get me through the rest of the year. This time, I got 22 messages from people in the first 24 hours. 22 including from people saying that they had numerous inquiries to them about what had happened to me. I got at least 3 phone calls asking about my personal well-being. And initially I was going to just stay off for about, a few days to kind of, get some work done, reset, Now I have to really reflect on my relationship with the medium.
Oh, I think you're enjoying the attention of people being like, oh my God, Ben, are you okay? But in all seriousness, I actually think it's really cool that people are contacting you to see if you're right, because I think we need to do more of that as a society. Check in with people, see how they are. It's a good thing.
Check that people haven't been... Check that people are mostly concerned they might have missed a cancellation event. I think.
All the tweets are gone. What did he say?
Did anybody get a screen grab? Yeah, it was just another fucking Bachelor quip. I don't know.
Well, it was pretty tough staying off Twitter while The Bachelorette was on last night, especially while Horn Dog Lexi was just going for it with Jack. So I had to start just texting people individually with the hashtag.
I thought you quit.
Are you in front of your TV right now?
I thought you quit because you got tweet referenced on the panel.
Oh, I did get tweet referenced on the panel. Part of why I decided to do it then was, we just had our 3-day baby lockdown, and like a robot in a sci-fi movie slowly gaining sentience, I started to become aware of how much I had posted during that 3-day period. And I felt sick, obviously. And then I was like, well, it's a little blip. These were extreme circumstances, the anxiety of lockdown. Over the past week, for instance, then I scrolled down, I was like, oh my God.
Who is this man?
How did we get here? This is...
For all your reality television takes, tune into the Real Pod, which has returned on the Spin-Off Podcast Network.
Yeah, or text me at 7:30 p.m. tonight.
At any hour of the day or night.
During the Bachelor.
I'll publish his phone number on Twitter this evening.
The big shout out to Flick Electric, who keep the politics ticking at the Spin-Off. You can check out the offers they have through any politics page.
Just while we're making shout outs, can I shout out to Rachel House?
Rachel House,
the amazing Ngai Tahu actress who is a big listener to Gone by Lunchtime. I saw her at a party recently, and she's a big fan of the show and a woman of tremendous taste.
Huge taste, huge talent. This podcast is a big fan of Rachel House.
This podcast is a huge fan of Rachel House.
We're also a big fan, since we're going down that track, of Leonie Hayden, who is celebrating a major birthday today, and to whom we dedicate this podcast.
Happy birthday! Rā whānau kia koe, Auntie Darling.
This one goes out to Leonie.
Anyone else we want to shout out? We want to shout out the members, the Spin-Off members, who quite literally have kept the Spin-Off alive through these tumultuous times. So join up, become a Spin-Off member, and you too will get to hear more deleted tweets from Ben Thomas. Right. Ben, you mentioned the baby 3-day lockdown. That happened, it was a week ago that we were in lockdown. It seems like a long time ago, and now here we are, just flemming into the spittoon. We are back in level 1 across the country.
Felt like a long time in lockdown, to be fair.
Did it?
I'm going to take like a Waitangi tribunal case, a claim against the government for making me take care of my own children for 3 days in a row. It's not cool. And work at the same time.
Right.
And try and pretend to educate them. I didn't even bother pretending.
No. I don't think that's a good idea. I think you need to...
It's a contemporary claim. I'm allowed.
You need a symbolic amount of here's some working for a short period so that they have done some amount of schoolwork, but it doesn't need to be longer than 5 or 6 minutes.
No, I don't even do that. I'm like, nah.
Did you read that deep dive in the Herald about the Wi-Fi horrors in a North Shore home?
No.
Where it was impossible to keep all 3 kids occupied on screens and have good quality for the mum's Zoom call meetings for work.
Right.
And they were like, it's just untenable. This can't continue.
Someone's going to have to go SD.
The ultra-fast broadband, actually, imagine if we hadn't done that. Then the country wouldn't have... we keep thanking the kind of clear comms and the quality epidemiological advice, but actually it was the UFB.
Thanks, Stephen Joyce, for not going completely mental last year.
Kia ora, Stephen Joyce. Stephen Joyce, Leonie Hayden and Rachel House to this podcast. Devoted. Was it quite well managed, though, in the end? It was a sort of Sunday afternoon deal, and everybody seems to reasonably well know the drill. Ben, was this an example of the political management working well again?
Yeah, they executed it well, short, sharp. I think it became clear, possibly from Annabelle's emails to the Beehive on Monday, but probably from taking the pulse of the nation, the threshold, the patience for lockdown had eroded. I found a lot of people, this lockdown seemed to hit them a bit harder than you might expect from last year's experience. When you think about it, it's actually a long time since we had that August lockdown. It seems like just
it was all the way back in August.
But it was actually, sort of 6 months ago. And, people's tolerance for the lockdowns, I think, has worn thin. Which, shout out to all of our compatriots over in the UK and the United States who have been dealing with this for a year continuously. And are not allowed back because of limited MIQ spots. Kia kaha, hang on in there.
We did some polling around this latest short lockdown, and the numbers in terms of the overall support for the government's response to COVID-19 just remains kind of almost inviolably high. It's still at 79%, and it's been between sort of 70, 76 and 85 the whole time. And people, I'm sure that's true, that they see the emails from Annabelle, the Waitangi Tribunal claims, but at the same time, there does the trust levels have been extraordinary in terms of this extent to which they've remained high, haven't they?
Well, if you look at the US, I think today they have reached 500,000 COVID deaths, more than the First World War, the Second World War and Vietnam combined. And I think that New Zealanders, although we're very lucky living in the New Zealand hellhole, I think that we genuinely are aware that we genuinely are in a privileged position. I thought the lockdown was handled really well, and I think that it was a very smooth transition into it too. There didn't seem to be a lot of people kicking up. Perhaps it's because it's so close to summer as well. It wasn't a big sort of intellectual leap to go into lockdown for a few days, but man, I'd rather be here than anywhere else in the world, that's for sure. The thing that I am concerned about, though, is the ongoing issue that we have with MIQ workers and people at the borders who are underpaid, don't have great working conditions, and, they're our most at-risk group, and we've got to take better care of them, and that's really on private business to step up, and obviously the government to pressure them to take care of those workers better, because literally the safety of our country is in their hands.
There was an interesting moment in the House, I think it was last week, when Chris Hipkins, who's the minister responsible for the overall COVID response, chastised unnamed public health experts, but which I think it's safe to assume he meant Nick Wilson and perhaps Michael Baker, for referring to border failures. And he went on to say that the trouble with rhetoric like that was that it hurt the morale and make people less inclined to work at the border, which may or may not be true. But then when you see in the next breath that some of those people on the border are basically being paid minimum wage, you kind of think maybe that's part of the issue too.
That is the border failure.
They pull out their pay slips, look at their total pay for the weekend,
that helps
with
morale.
Dang, Nick Wilson.
Obviously danger money or hazard money or whatever is there are various arguments against going down that path, but I don't think many people would have much argument with those who are working in MIQ facilities around the country and at the border and other range of jobs being paid a fair whack more.
Absolutely. There should be no such thing as the minimum wage. We should only have a living wage as a bare minimum. But the other thing too is ensuring that they've got adequate sick leave and all of those things, because if they don't have enough, then they're not going to, them and their whānau that they share their homes with, need better working conditions, so that if you are feeling a bit crook, that you do know that you can take a day off and go get tested and all of that stuff too.
Yeah, it's a no-brainer. The border should be gold-plated. Everyone should be being paid, double like oil rig workers,
Absolutely.
If we can have them doing, long shifts on, long shifts off, rather than commuting in, every day, that would be ideal as well. But essentially, there is no amount, basically, that we can spend on the border that would be too much at this stage, particularly in the dying days as we come through to, the vaccine rollout program has started. The end is hopefully in sight, touch wood, barring South American variants with sort of 18 heads or whatever kind of flaring into full life. But, there isn't any amount that we can spend on the border that's too much, and I would have thought that making it a pleasant or at least attractive place to work would be, foremost amongst those priorities.
It was interesting to see the National Party seem to have accepted that generally there's support for the measures, and they've, I think unanimously they have supported the decision to go into lockdown and shifted tack in the form of Chris Bishop on the weekend, making the argument that there should be a serious examination of building bespoke MIQ facilities outside Auckland, which is something that's been talked about, including by some public health experts for some time. Maybe it's a bit late in the piece for that, but that seems like a richer vein to mine for the opposition, that we need to rethink the hotels as MIQ in the way that they are in some of the places, including Melbourne, I believe, or Victoria.
Yeah, hotels were only ever meant to be a stopgap measure because they were big empty spaces with lots of rooms. They're certainly not designed for quarantine. They have lots of communal spaces. They have, small areas. So some of the MIQ hotels, the windows don't open, and people spend basically 2 weeks without fresh air.
Yeah.
They say that it's a matter of, when I say they, the brainy people,
Them.
the immunologists,
Yeah,
and that
that's
say that it's if not when we get the next round of some sort of super virus. So it seems to make sense that we would invest in those facilities now, even though we are hopefully at the tail end of COVID, and in a country where we still have people living in cars and deciding whether or not to separate their children from one another or, remain in a car together. It seems that sort of accommodation would be put to good use between epidemics.
What about if we go old school and just convert, like, for example, Waiheke Island into a quarantine island? You've got some connects there. Annabelle, do you reckon that would work?
We could actually, Pakatoa's for sale, Pakatoa Island, and it's got like hotel facilities and all of that stuff there. Let's buy Pakatoa. Let's get Pakatoa back.
By Pakatoa.
I'll put that in my treaty claim.
Okay,
Do a fundraiser like we did for that beach down in Nelson that no one's visited since.
Didn't Gareth Morgan buy that beach?
No.
Did he get gazumped by...
Yeah, he
offered to buy it
fund.
if he could have it to himself for a certain amount of time.
Pakatoa
Something
Island
like that, wasn't
and
it?
the beach in the Sounds.
He wanted a timeshare with the people of New Zealand.
The vaccination program is underway, which is a good thing. And for those MIQ workers that we talked about, it does mean for many of them that they'll be able to hopefully resume some of the... I saw some of them say they've been living level 4 lives, and hopefully they'll be able to move more into that. As far as it was certainly fortuitous timing for the government that when this last short snap lockdown went through, the vaccination rollout was basically underway. In terms of that level of support, you wonder whether or not people would have been so on board if that part of the solution hadn't already been begun.
We actually have a poll coming up on our first Hui program this
About
year.
Ben Thomas.
About Ben Thomas's disappearance and the most popular theories, but also what the uptake will be for Māori of the vaccination program. What if there is vaccine hesitancy, what the key factors are for it, and also what the incentives would be to get those people to reconsider and get on board. So looking forward to reading those. And
You don't have the results yet? You can't
Not yet.
Tell us here?
Can't tell you here.
Okay.
But you can see them on Monday night, 8:30.
I mean, they released some numbers from the Ministry of Health, did some research into that, and there is a higher scepticism, I think, among Māori and Pacific Island communities, and there's that other real problem of countering misinformation, right? That it's, I mean, they're saying the right things. Do you think that the authorities will be able to reach into those communities to get the message out?
I think that's going to be the clincher, is seeing what their Māori specific plan is for educating Māori, talking through, their concerns, how you access them, whether it's through marae or their local hauora or whatever. I haven't read a lot of information about that yet. Are they going to target them on social media? I don't know. But obviously that's going to be critical to, the uptake, because, as you say, Māori do display higher levels of vaccine hesitancy, and we know why that is. It's about suspicion of the state, mistrust, and it's a universal pattern that you see with iwi people that have obviously had a rough historical relationship with their governments.
We've had a trial run of this with the initial lockdown. I don't know if you remember how jarring it was when the first lockdown started last year, walking along the streets and all of the bus shelters were COVID-19, stay home, stay safe signs. Every YouTube thing that you loaded would start off with a COVID-19 ad. The Radio New Zealand, which normally doesn't have ads, had COVID-19 notices. It was just blanket coverage. Facebook was rife with it. And it showed that, we still can actually reach most people if there's a will. And I would expect that we will need to see the same, level of commitment in terms of communicating that message. Full-on RoboCop dystopian future, just wherever you go, you hear about the vaccine. I think iwi are a natural ally of the government in this. I think iwi did a really good job. If you look at those checkpoints during the COVID-19, in terms of getting their stuff out, getting out resources, getting out food, getting out supplies to people even in far-flung places. Tūhoi, who I do a bit of work with, we're very busy on that kind of thing, going into, the sort of wildest reaches of Te Urawera and Kaingaroa, and I can't see any reason why that wouldn't happen again. I think most iwi organisations are very cognizant of this threat and are very on board with, even guys like Hone Harawira, who are about as anti-establishment as they come, are going to be key figures in helping get their people protected through the vaccine. I
agree, and yet we're also seeing the Billy TK type characters who are, although they can't get elected, obviously, but there is a groundswell of support for people like him. So it's like, how do we get into those? How do we target those communities? What are the messages? What is the security they feel they need to be okay to take this vaccine?
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the fourth Labour government, a podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards it.
There's a radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the fourth Labour government, made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on The Spin-Off or wherever you get your podcasts.
Kia ora, I'm Alex Casey, Senior Writer at The Spin-Off. We wouldn't exist without the ongoing support of our generous members. If you're able to, you can make a donation at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
In the middle of that lockdown, there was another news story that sort of suddenly exploded onto the tiles in Parliament when Jacinda Ardern appeared and was, by many accounts, the angriest that anyone had seen her, etc., etc. Trans-Tasman relations were wobblier than many analysts had seen for anywhere else, and that surrounded the news of a young woman with 2 children who was detained after attempting to cross from Syria into Turkey. She was linked to ISIS or ISIL or Daesh or Islamic State, and it transpired that she was a dual citizen. She'd moved from New Zealand to Australia when she was 6 years old, and the Australian authorities had suspended her citizenship, withdrawn her citizenship, leaving her with only a New Zealand citizenship live, and of course it's a breach of international law to render anybody stateless. So that meant that New Zealand was left holding quite literally the babies of, not literally, but nearly literally, the children particularly. And Jacinda Ardern was furious about it. She talked about it being an abdication of responsibility. This was not normal diplomatic talk. She said Australia need to stop exporting their problems, which was a kind of sort of a similar language to the language she's used in the past in relation to the 501s who were deported from, who have been deported from Australia. Of course, the difference between the 501s, who are people who mostly have had criminal records or imprisonment in Australia and then deported to New Zealand, and is that they didn't have Australian citizenship. So in this case, it was someone who also had Australian citizenship, and it was very much your problem. And probably playing to the Australian popular sentiment at the same time.
Oh, well, the thing is that Australia doesn't even take back its own, like, dual citizenship aside, their own born and bred Australian jihadi brides. I watched an amazing documentary on Four Corners in 2019 about a grandmother whose daughter had become, had married a young Muslim man in Australia and had become fundamentalised, and they went off to Syria with their tamariki and stuff, and she was on a mission to track down her daughter and her mokopuna, who were living in a refugee camp in the most horrific circumstances. And however you might feel about those mothers, whether they willingly went or were coerced or bullied or abused into it, them aside, the idea that you could have Australian tamariki living in a refugee camp through no actions or nothing to do with them, completely innocent, is absolutely abhorrent. But that's what Australia does. So I'm not at all surprised by his stance, and it's kind of ironic that a country that was founded by imported convicts now has zero tolerance for convicts at all. The reality is that New Zealand, we need Australia, don't we, in terms of our trade and stuff. We can't really exert there's no levers that we can really pull, and I don't think there's really the appetite for it. The only way the 501s, the jihadi brides issue is ever going to get solved is through diplomacy, and that is going to take a long, 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 long time, if it ever happens. But what I think we need to do is accept the fact that these people are coming back. They already are, and we don't really have the resources or the facilities or even, it seems, the will to take care of them and integrate them back into society. But the reality is that we have to, because they're coming and they're already wreaking havoc in terms of, pee in the provinces and all of that stuff. We can't afford not to get some proper resource and programs around how we bring these people back into Aotearoa.
501s you're referring to now, right? Yeah. As far as this case goes, though, Ben, the principle seems pretty clear, but the politics, Australia's not going to change its mind, is it?
They're not going to change their mind. They never change their mind. Politically, good for Scott Morrison, good for Jacinda Ardern, in that she can take a strong stand, she can blast ScoMo, and it won't make any difference. That's no reason not to blast ScoMo, but for years we've seen the erosion of the rights of New Zealand citizens over in Australia, in welfare and education compared to Australians in New Zealand. We have this sort of one-way traffic. We didn't deport the Christchurch shooter to Australia.
Well, on that point, which I think is an interesting one, I don't want it to be a cheap shot, but I do wonder if it had been the other way around and there had been a shooter in Australia who had grown up all formative years, all family, all education in New Zealand, and then I imagine that you would have heard a lot about the New Zealand terrorist, whereas as far as the political leadership was here, there was almost an active resistance to try and kind of fob it off as this guy's an Australian, which he is.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, the 501s, a lot of them have never lived in New Zealand, you know, at all. And now have just come over here to sort of set up organised crime. And
new side hustle.
yeah, that's right. You do your OE, you know, set up a P ring in the Bay of Plenty. And yeah, I mean, look, there's no solution to it. Obviously, giving Australia a few tips about how to run their external affairs didn't work out too well for Damien O'Connor. You know, telling the Australians that they needed to be a bit more respectful of China. New Zealand has a lot less stroke and influence in international affairs than I think that we believe we do. Sometimes I think that New Zealand is a bit like the sort of Lisa Simpson who kind of comes to try and arbitrate between two arguing adults and often thinks that their words are going to carry a bit more gravity than they actually do.
Gone by lunchtime, listeners. If you want to watch that documentary that I was talking about, it's called The Orphans of ISIS. The grandmother's name is Carol Nettleton, and it's a Four Corners documentary, and it's an incredible watch if you've got a spare 45 minutes up your sleeve.
Is that the one where there's one of those programs where, one of those ABC programs where they actually speak to this particular woman in Syria? Is that one?
They they follow the grandmother into Syria, into the refugee camp. She's got to run around and try and find her daughter, which is obviously hard when every woman there is wearing a burqa and you can't identify them, and find her mokopuna and stuff. It's an incredibly powerful, heartbreaking story, and it just shows how callous Australia is, even towards its own citizens, children.
This particular woman, who's 26 years old, had three children. One of them has died, and now has two children. You can just somehow made her way from the refugee camps in Syria, to the Turkish border, which is a very long way. It's extraordinary, really. I should say that we are speaking on Tuesday morning at around 10 o'clock, and so it was very unfortunate timing as far as one of the other big political stories of the week is concerned, which is the latest data on child poverty, which is probably being revealed by the Department of Statistics, or Stats NZ rather, around now. Those numbers, Annabelle, will not reflect the COVID impact, because even though they go in theory to June 2020, they stopped collecting the data when COVID hit, so it won't be distorted by that. The expectation is, and we don't know because we haven't seen them, is that they'll measure a slight improvement. Is that good enough?
Well, I personally don't think it is, because I think that while I understand that you can't, for whatever reason, collect that information during lockdown, and I don't even know how it is that they collect that information, but I think it's safe to assume that most of those kids would have been doing it much, much worse in lockdown. So I don't know if they're going to build in like some sort of massive reduction, because I think we should be measuring people at their poorest, not just on average. I'm really heartened to see the poll that was conducted that showed that, was it 69% of New Zealanders, 73% of young New Zealanders support a raise in benefits for our most vulnerable. You know, if we're to look at the cannabis referendum, if we're to accept that 52% or whatever it was a mandate not to legalise, then I think we can take this as a very strong mandate that it's time to raise benefits and raise them now.
We had, Ben, there's, assuming there is a little bit of shift, it'll be, there's the families package, the winter energy payment, best start payment, there's that stuff. But as Annabelle mentions, this poll, the UMR poll, it's a reliable poll that was commissioned by a group of NGOs, suggests that there is a broad public support for an increase base income levels. That was the recommendation of the expert welfare advisory group. There's been resistance on that so far, and it's pointed out that this is that's a big operation. That's an operational spend increase rather than chucking money at people one off. But are we reaching a point where it's kind of an irresistible pressure, momentum, consensus in favour of lifting basic benefit levels?
I mean, remember, basic benefit levels have been lifted. They were lifted last year by the government in advance of, as part of initially their COVID response package. And I think there was a suspicion that all they were doing was bringing forward an announcement from the budget that was already planned.
It was a tiny amount too.
It was $25 a week? So only the second lift in real terms since the 2016 budget, I think, which was where John Key and Bill English raised it by, I think, $20 a week. So it is making up some ground in real terms. Prior to that, there had been no sort of non-inflationary increase since 1991 when they were cut, by 25%, I think, in the mother of all budgets. So the
Welfare Advisory Group called to increase benefits from between 12 and 47%.
Yeah.
And the Greens had, as part of their confidence and supply agreement with the last Labor government, to overhaul the benefit system. That was agreed. But anyway,
So you'd be hard pressed to call it an overhaul. Yeah. But it is interesting, right? Because in the past, I don't think we've seen that kind of support for raising benefits. There has been this sort of narrative of, dole bludgers, etc. And thankfully we're moving away from that. Nobody is, back in the days of the 1990s when nobody blinked that John Banks was on Talkback every week. It was this popular narrative that, beneficiaries, solo mothers were living high on the hog. They were spending all their money on booze and cigarettes and partying all the time. And it seems that thanks to very good journalism, good work by advocacy groups, we've now got a better reflection of actually what the unfortunate poverty at the bottom of our society actually looks like, and people do seem to have a more realistic view of that. And you would think, look, it probably is time to raise assistance. The only problem is that without addressing all of these other issues we have, particularly housing, just as we saw when student allowances and student loans went up, a lot of that flows straight into that lower end of the rental market, and landlords just see that as a reason to increase rents. So without addressing other issues, you won't get the full impact of raising benefit levels. So all of these measures to address poverty are much, they're still more complicated than just raising the benefit levels, although that obviously won't hurt.
The rent bludgers.
That's right.
The rent bludgers bludging off the government by raising their tenants' rents.
Well, I think the most important thing we can agree is that any measure that increases house prices is a good one, because that's what we
that's
need
right.
to do.
the engine room of the New Zealand economy.
Quite. Very quickly, it seems like a long time ago now, but I think it is since we last podcasted, is that there was the flare-up in Parliament over ties, and Rawiri Waititi, who is the co-leader of the Māori Party, who'd already had a few run-ins with Trevor Mallard, the Speaker, went into Parliament wearing a heitiki, which is like a pounamu carved, very elegant, and was ejected from the House. Anyway, one thing led to another. There was a blah, 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 and in the end he won. And it was variously described as kind of really important symbolically, in terms of Mitsiri Ature, the former leader of the Green Party, wrote a terrific piece for us on that subject, or as trivial. But it also showed, Annabelle, and I'm curious on your thoughts on all of this, the Māori Party are pretty good at doing politics so far.
They are. Well, I've heard that. I think it's a great thing, and I think the House of, while I believe that, he mana tō te whare pāremata, Parliament is a house that has its own mana, and I don't think that people should be wearing their stubbies and work shirts into Parliament. I think, it should be formal attire, but it is the House of Representatives, and so it should be representatives of what our different iwi in New Zealand, Pākehā, Māori, Pasifika, Asian, it should reflect what their cultures say, their taonga, their formal symbols and stuff. So I think it's a great achievement for the Māori Party. I've heard the argument that it's trivial politics and that they should be getting on with it, and that it's just symbolism. There might be a bit of truth in that, but here's the thing. The Māori Party isn't in government. They're not going to be able to push through sweeping policy changes. So in order to remain in the public eye and remain in the conscience of the people, they have to have these political acts that's going to keep them relevant and out there. So I actually think it's really smart politics that they're cherry-picking these issues, and while they might be symbolism, can be important, and so I think good on them. But I also think it's a good way of keeping the party's profile out there. It's something they were able to achieve despite being in opposition, because we know they're not going to be able to, make sweeping policy changes.
Yeah, it's 100% right. What they're doing is showing that they're going to dig in. They're not going to give any ground. They're not going to yield on Trevor Mallard or anything that they see as, business as usual, the establishment. In contrast, Peter Sharples and Dame Tariana Turia achieved a lot in government. That often gets glossed over. Whānau Ora is still going, and it's growing in importance in government. They stopped the Kermadec sanctuary because of its infringement on Māori fishing rights.
That's debatable.
They made improvements to the RMA that required more consultation with iwi. What they couldn't do, though, is convince their supporters and their voters that they were sufficiently independent. And the current incarnation of the Māori Party is really at pains to show that it's that they're their own people, that they're not beholden to anyone, that they're not going to give an inch in these fights. And, politically, I think, given the fate of the previous incarnation of the Māori Party, that's the right thing for them to do right now.
Street cred.
I'm amazed that it got to that point because, the requirement is, into the standing orders, is for business attire. I think anyone who looked at Rawiri Waititi would think he's dressed for business. He's not dressed for clubbing. He's not dressed for jogging. That's business attire. And the thing that rankled with me is it gave a chance for all these fucking nerds to jump in and go like, I've never felt comfortable wearing a tie. I didn't like wearing a uniform at school. Like all these just sad fucking 50-year-old white dudes who are like, as the first big day out, man, I've never liked authority.
Ben Thomas is currently wearing a 3-piece suit with a cravat.
I actually think that stuff's important. I used to put on a tie to call into radio interviews. When I was
You're a dick. You're a dick. Let's end.
Love you, Ben. Love you, Annabelle. Love you, Tina. Thank you, Flick. Thank you, members. Thank you, Leonie Hayden. Thank you, Rachel House.
Talofa Lover. I'm Madeline Chapman, editor at The Spin-Off. If you have the means, consider supporting our high-quality journalism by becoming a Spin-Off member. Sign up now at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Kia ora, I'm Duncan Grieve, founder of The Spin-Off. You can help us keep all of The Spin-Off's award-winning journalism free for everybody by becoming a member today at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
The Spin-Off Podcast Network.